I never expected to be writing one of these posts, but after what happened yesterday, I need somewhere to vent and maybe get some advice. My name's Alex, and until 5 years ago, I was living a pretty normal life in the city with my accounting job. Then my dad had his first heart attack, and everything changed. I moved back to my childhood home in Sunnyvale Estates to help care for him and my mom, whose arthritis was getting worse. Sunnyvale Estates looked like paradise when I was growing up. Pristine lawns, matching mailboxes, and a community pool that was the envy of neighboring subdivisions. My parents bought their house there in the 90s, long before property values skyrocketed. They loved the quiet streets and how everyone used to look out for each other. But in the 5 years I'd been away, things had changed. The HOA, which used to be a casual organization that mostly organized block parties, had transformed into something unrecognizable. At the helm was Eleanor Harrington, a retired corporate lawyer who'd moved in 3 years ago and quickly seized control of the board through what my dad called aggressive networking. I first met Eleanor 2 weeks after moving back home. I was replanting Mom's flower beds when a shadow fell across the garden. "Those are non-approved plantings," came a clipped voice. I looked up to see a tall woman in her 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and pearl earrings that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Excuse me," I said, confused. "Those flowers, they're not on the approved vegetation list." She handed me a yellow slip of paper. "This is a courtesy notice. You'll need to remove them within 48 hours and replace them with approved species. The list is on the community portal." "But these are the same flowers that have been here for 20 years, I explained. "My mom plants them every spring." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. The approved list was updated last quarter. All homeowners were notified. If you need help accessing the portal, you can attend my digital literacy workshop on Wednesday. As she walked away, I noticed she was taking photos of other houses on the street. My dad later explained that Eleanor had implemented a modernized violation tracking system and had recruited a team of community compliance volunteers who reported infractions. That yellow slip was just the beginning. A month after the flower incident, I received an official violation notice in the mail. Apparently, my Honda Civic, a perfectly normal, clean 5-year-old car, was deemed an eyesore because it was parked in the driveway overnight. All vehicles must be garaged between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. The notice read, "Violation fine, $75. I was furious. We had a 2-car garage that already housed my parents' vehicles. Where was I supposed to park? When I called the HOA office, I was told I could appeal at the next board meeting in 2 weeks. At the meeting, Eleanor sat center stage at a folding table, flanked by 4 other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The small community center was half filled with other residents, most looking defeated before the proceedings even began. When my case came up, I explained my situation calmly. I'm living with my parents to help care for them. We have 3 adults but only a 2-car garage. This rule is unreasonable for households with more than 2 drivers. Eleanor adjusted her glasses. The rules exist to maintain property values. Cars in driveways overnight create a cluttered appearance and suggest overcrowding. Perhaps you should consider alternative transportation or renting a garage from a neighbor with excess space." "That's ridiculous," I countered. "My car is clean, in good condition, and parked neatly." Additionally, Eleanor continued as if I hadn't spoken, "Your vehicle has been observed with what appears to be a political bumper sticker, which violates our regulation against public displays that could be considered controversial." I was dumbfounded. It's for a national park. It's literally just a picture of mountains. The board has deemed any bumper adornment as potentially divisive. Your appeal is denied, and since this is now your 2nd violation including the unapproved vegetation, the fine has increased to $150. As I left, another resident whispered, "Don't fight it. She always wins." Over the next 3 months, our mailbox filled with violation notices. $50 for a garden hose visible from the street, $75 for trash bins left at curb 30 minutes after pickup, $100 for holiday decorations up 2 days past the allowed period $125 for excessive porch items, 2 chairs and a small table, $200 for unauthorized gathering, when I hosted a small birthday dinner for my dad and guests parked on the street. My parents were mortified and kept paying the fines without argument. Dad's blood pressure medication had been increased twice, and I knew the stress wasn't helping. "It's easier to just comply," Mom said quietly after Eleanor personally delivered a notice about our substandard lawn maintenance. The grass was half an inch too tall in one corner of the yard. But I couldn't stand by anymore. I started researching HOA laws and discovered that many of Sunnyvale's recent rule changes hadn't followed proper procedure. When I brought this up at the next meeting and questioned the financial reports, which showed a suspicious amount spent on administrative consulting, Eleanor cut my microphone. "This is disruptive behavior and will not be tolerated," she announced to the room. The board moves to end public comment period. As I returned to my seat, our neighbor Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm. Her adult son had Down syndrome, and they've been fighting the HOA over a reasonable accommodation request for months. "They're trying to force us out," she whispered. "They denied our request for a support animal and fined us when David's caregiver parked in the visitor spot for too long. Can you help us?" Soon I was meeting secretly with a small group of neighbors, all victims of Eleanor's regime. The Paddles had been fined for cooking odors. The Robinsons, an elderly couple, had received violations for their grandson's toys being visible in the backyard. The Jacksons had been denied permission to install solar panels despite state law protecting such installations. We were building a case, documenting everything, when the next bomb dropped. 6 months into my HOA nightmare, I arrived home to find a tow truck in our driveway and Eleanor standing with her arms crossed, watching as the driver hooked up my car. "What the hell is happening?" I demanded, rushing over. After repeated violations, the board has authorized removal of the vehicle, Eleanor stated coldly. The notice was sent last week. We never received any notice. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "This is illegal. Unhook my car right now." The tow truck driver looked uncomfortable. "Lady, I'm just doing my job." Eleanor stepped between us. The removal is authorized under Bylaw 7.3. Additionally, we're issuing a special assessment against your parents' property for continued non-compliance and resident hostility. The amount is $2,500, due within 30 days. $2,000. I sputtered. "That's insane. You can't do this." "If unpaid, a line will be placed on the property." She smiled thinly. "Perhaps this level of enforcement will finally motivate appropriate compliance." I managed to convince the tow driver to wait while I showed him that we'd never received the supposed notice. Reluctantly, he unhooked my car, but Eleanor was furious. That night, my dad suffered another heart attack. At the hospital, the doctor took me aside. His condition is stabilizing, but the stress isn't helping. Has something happened recently to upset him? When I got home, I found another notice taped to the door. The special assessment had been increased to $3,000 for interfering with HOA enforcement actions. That was it. I'd had enough. No more playing nice. I took a week off work and went into full investigation mode. First, I submitted formal requests for all HOA records, financial statements, meeting minutes, rule changes, everything they were legally required to provide. When they lost my request, I sent it by certified mail with a lawyer's letter citing state laws about HOA transparency. Meanwhile, I set up an anonymous online forum for Sunnyvale residents to document their HOA experiences. Evidence poured in as people shared their stories and violation notices. I also discovered Eleanor had connections to several service providers who had exclusive contracts with the HOA, including her son's landscaping company and her brother-in-law's property management firm. The financial records, when finally provided, were clearly incomplete, but even the sanitized versions showed troubling patterns of excessive spending on professional services and administrative support with minimal documentation. I took everything to a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. After reviewing the evidence, he smiled. "This is textbook abuse of power and possibly financial misconduct." We have grounds for a civil suit and potentially criminal charges. With his help, I drafted a formal complaint to the State Housing Authority and contacted the local news. The reporter was especially interested in the special assessments that seemed to target elderly residents and families with special needs members. When the first news segment aired, Neighborhood Nightmare, HOA accused of discriminatory practices, Eleanor showed up at our door, livid. "You've made a serious mistake," she hissed. "This will only make things worse for your family." I smiled calmly. "Actually, Eleanor, I've just gotten started." 2 days later, I received notice that the HOA was initiating foreclosure proceedings on my parents' home for unpaid assessments and persistent covenant violations. My dad, still recovering, was devastated. "We'll lose everything we've worked for," he whispered. But I had anticipated this move. "No, Dad, they're not taking anything from us. Trust me." The foreclosure threat was Eleanor's critical mistake. It gave us standing for an emergency injunction, which the judge granted immediately upon seeing the pattern of targeted enforcement and questionable financial practices. The court also ordered a forensic audit of the HOA's books. The results were damning. Eleanor had been funneling HOA funds through her private consulting company, while the board treasurer, her golf buddy, had been manipulating the books. Over $200,000 in homeowner dues had been misappropriated over 3 years. The news coverage expanded from local to regional. Residents who had been afraid to speak up now did so publicly. 3 board members resigned, distancing themselves from Eleanor and claiming they'd been kept in the dark about the financial improprieties. But Eleanor doubled down. At an emergency HOA meeting that drew nearly every household, she defended the necessary administrative expenses and blamed the community's problems on troublemakers who refused to maintain standards. When she pointed at me specifically, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Robinson, the 78-year-old widow who barely spoke above a whisper, stood up. "My husband and I were founding members of this community," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "We've paid our dues faithfully for 30 years, and I have never, ever been treated with such disrespect as I have under your leadership." One by one, other residents stood, the Chins, the Paddles, families who had been silently suffering under Eleanor's reign. Even former board members admitted they'd been bullied into compliance. By the end of the meeting, a vote of no confidence had removed Eleanor and the remaining loyal board members. A temporary committee was appointed to oversee operations until a proper election could be held. As Eleanor stormed out, she pointed at me. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I had no idea how prophetic those words would be. 3 weeks after Eleanor's removal, my parents were killed in a car accident. They were coming home from dinner when a driver ran a red light. I was devastated, lost in grief and arrangements. The funeral was a blur. So many neighbors came, expressing condolences, bringing food, offering help. Even in my grief, I was touched by how the community had come together. Then came the reading of the will. I sat in the attorney's office, flanked by my older brother Jason and younger sister Megan. They'd flown in for the funeral, but hadn't been part of our parents' daily lives for years. Jason had moved across the country for work. Megan had been finding herself in various countries, funded by our parents' generosity. The attorney cleared his throat. "To our children, we leave our estate as follows. To Jason and Megan, we leave all property, financial accounts, and possessions jointly owned between them." My heart stopped. "To Alex, we leave nothing except this letter, with the explanation. You know why." The room spun. After everything I'd done to help them, to protect them from Eleanor, to care for them in their final years, they'd left me nothing. And what did "you know why" mean? Jason looked uncomfortable. "Well, I guess we should talk about the house. We'll probably sell it, so you'll need to find somewhere else to live pretty soon." Numb, I returned to my parents' house, my siblings' house, and sat in Dad's study, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I noticed something odd, a sealed envelope taped under his desk drawer with my name on it. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "My dearest Alex, if you're reading this, we're gone. I'm so sorry for the shock you must have felt today. The will is not what it seems. Eleanor threatened us after you began fighting back. She claimed she would ensure we lost everything if we didn't control you. We knew she had connections with judges and local officials who could make our lives hell. So we created this plan with our private attorney, not the one reading this will. Everything goes to Jason and Megan temporarily, but there's a trust that activates 30 days after our passing. They know about it and have signed all the necessary paperwork. Everything ultimately comes to you. We couldn't risk Eleanor discovering our true intentions while we were vulnerable. This was the only way to protect our home and your inheritance from her reach. On this USB drive is everything I've been secretly collecting about Eleanor and the HOA, recordings, emails, financial documents I managed to obtain as a former treasurer. Use it to finish what you started. We are so proud of you for standing up for what's right. All our love, Dad and Mom. With shaking hands, I called Jason. Did you know about this trust Dad mentioned, that everything comes to me after 30 days? Of course, he said. We were going to tell you tomorrow after things settled. Dad made us promise to wait until after the official will reading. Something about HOA spies and preventing retaliation. I plugged in the USB drive. It contained years of evidence, far more than I'd managed to collect. Dad had been building his own case all along, documenting every interaction, secretly recording conversations with Eleanor, tracking the money trail. The final folder was labeled CK and contained proof of Eleanor's biggest crime. She'd been falsifying property values and manipulating sales through a shell company to drive up HOA fees while purchasing foreclosed properties at below market rates. It was time to end this once and for all. Exactly 30 days after the will reading, two significant events occurred. First, the trust activated, transferring ownership of my parents' home and all assets to me, exactly as they planned. Second, I walked into the district attorney's office with a complete case file against Eleanor Harrington: financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, housing discrimination, and a dozen other charges. By evening, Eleanor had been arrested at her country club in front of everyone who mattered to her socially. The case made national news. HOA tyrant's reign of terror ends in fraud charges. The investigation expanded beyond our community, revealing similar patterns in two other neighborhoods where Eleanor had previously served on HOA boards. Former victims came forward, and additional charges piled up. At the preliminary hearing, I sat in the front row as Eleanor entered in handcuffs. For a moment, our eyes met. Her face, once so confident and controlling, now showed something new: fear. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk due to Eleanor's extensive overseas accounts, also detailed in my father's files. Back at Sunnyvale Estates, the transformation was remarkable. The newly elected HOA board, which included Mrs. Chen and Mr. Pottle, implemented transparent processes and reasonable rules. Violations became rare and focused on genuine issues affecting community safety or function. The clubhouse hosted regular social events again. People planted whatever flowers they wanted. One evening, as I sat on the front porch with a glass of wine, Mrs. Robinson came by with a small potted plant. "Your mother loved gardening," she said, placing it beside me. This was from her original garden, before all the restrictions. I've been keeping cuttings alive all these years. I recognized the flowers, the same non-approved variety that had started our HOA battle years ago. "Thank you," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "They'll have a place of honor." My phone buzzed with a news alert. Eleanor had pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts in exchange for reduced sentencing. She faced at least 5 years in prison and had to pay restitution to all affected homeowners. I planted those flowers the next morning in a prominent spot visible from the street. As I patted the soil around them, I thought about my parents' clever plan to protect our home and their ultimate legacy, not just the property, but the lesson that standing up against injustice, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. Sometimes justice takes patience, careful planning, and a little bit of misdirection, just like gardening. If you enjoyed this true story of HOA revenge, follow me for updates. Eleanor's sentencing is next month, and I'll be there with bells on.